Hi everyone, this video was especially requested, and to be honest I was going to do Macbeth anyway because it is my favourite Shakespearean play, but when it was requested I got really excited because I had a really good excuse. If you have any special requests as well, please let me know in the comments below and I will do my best to try and get the video out as soon as possible. So today we're talking about the most important quotes in Macbeth. What I do, and I wanted to model this for you, is I copy and paste the full play into a Word document and then I read through it and I highlight the most important quote. Now I'm going to start with one of the first and most important quotes in Macbeth. The three witches say fair is foul and foul is fair. And this really encapsulates the whole idea of Macbeth, that it's chaotic, it is going against everything that is known to mankind. If you're wondering about the techniques, there will be another video just on techniques, but for now we're just going to focus on that. Now, what's really important in the beginning is that there is a lot of irony that Shakespeare uses because the traitor was actually a soldier who was treasonous, who was a traitor. And ironically, that's exactly what Macbeth does later on. So there is a sense of irony in this, that Macbeth showed so much bravery when he was going against the traitor, but yet he becomes one himself. And that there is Shakespeare using irony. So if we go down, I'm just going to take it like a bit at a time and we're going to go in chronological order so that it's just easier for everyone to understand. So there's still a repetition of the idea of foul and fair, and Macbeth says that this is an unprecedented day. Okay, so if you wanted to understand what the witches look like, and it does come into some of the motifs, it does come into some of the symbolism, but if you want to see, Banquo actually goes and describes them. So he says, what are these so withered and so wild in their attire? So they look weird, okay? They look wild, they look withered. And he says that look not like the inhabitants of the earth and yet are on it. They don't even look human. And this is one of the first things that Banquo describes them as. And then he says, you seem to understand me. This bit isn't highlighted, but it's interesting. Each at once, her chappy finger laying upon her skinny lips. So if you want to envisage it, the witches actually have their fingers on top of their lips as if to shush Banquo and Macbeth because they're about to talk. It's a very unsettling sort of setting, and that is what Shakespeare was going for. Now, one of the most important lines, if I am talking about the witches, and it comes into one of the motifs later, you should be women, and yet your beards forbid me to interpret that you are so. So they're women but with beards, and this becomes quite important when the motif and the theme of masculinity and femininity come in. We're going to talk about that later on in the motifs video, but just so you know, there is very much a theme of masculinity and femininity, and it's almost as if the witches bring those together, but not in a nice way. So we'll keep going. Oh, and this is where the witches greet Macbeth. This is important just to understand like what's happening in the story, but it's not important as a quote. They hail Macbeth that he is three things: the Thane of Glamis, the Thane of Cawdor, the King hereafter. And the thing that gets Macbeth's attention is he is the first one, but he's not the Thane of Cawdor, and he's certainly not the King. So he is very ambitious, and we know this because Banquo says he seems wrapped withal. So he's quite excited to hear. And they continue and they make a prophecy about Banquo as well. Banquo he questions, were such things here as we do speak about, or have we eaten on the insane root that takes the reason prisoner? So he thinks, look, are we imagining this? Are we making this up in our heads? And this is quite important because later on in the play, Macbeth and Lady Macbeth hallucinate. Well, Macbeth hallucinates and Lady Macbeth sleepwalks. But the idea of what is real and what is the mind really starts with Banquo's question here. So Macbeth says to him, your children will be kings. And Banquo says, you shall be king. Here we learn that Macbeth and Banquo are best friends, and they sort of just make jokes about what just happened. So Angus comes and he says about the rebel, the treason confessed and proved have overthrown him. So again, there's treason, there's a riot or like a revolution. They overthrow the Thane of Cawdor, and he realizes, Macbeth, right then and there, that minutes later, pretty much, the witches have prophesied. Now, what's really interesting about this is, have the witches prophesied the future? This has happened. This isn't a future, like the witches already know that this has happened. So really, the first two things are what's already happened. They're not prophecies. The idea that Macbeth will be king, that may be a prophecy, but it's one of those things that, did Macbeth bring it about on his own? Did he make it come about, or was it because of the witches? And that's a really important question, because one of the main themes that come up in Macbeth is, was he predestined or did he do this himself? And that's one of the most written about, debated ideas in Macbeth. Is Macbeth about predestination? Was, the witches came and they said, this is what's going to happen? Or did they just say it and, they could have said anything, and Macbeth was the one that really brought it about? So that comes up pretty early in the play, and it's really important. This is a really interesting quote from Macbeth himself. He says, cannot be ill, cannot be good. If ill, why hath it given me earnest of success, commencing in a truth? That could be one of the most important quotes to describe Macbeth. So he says, if it's bad, why has it given me a reason for success or a motive of success? He says, I am Thane of Cawdor. If good, why do I yield to that suggestion? With horrid image doth unfix my hair, and make my seated heart knock at my ribs against the use of nature. There is a motif of going against nature. And here it's actually said in those very words, which is very interesting. So his body is actually physically responding. His hair is sort of standing up on his, on his body. They're made like their image is so horrid. Like looking at the witches is so bad. It's making his hair stick up, and his heart is beating really fast against his ribs because he feels like it's so weird what's going on. But he's so excited about this because he is ambitious. And he says present fears are less than horrible imaginings. So they're actually so scary, they're actually so weird to look at, that they're worse than any imagination could possibly be. That could be really interesting if you wanted to write about the witches. Present fears are less than horrible imaginings, that they're beyond anything that you can imagine in terms of horridness. Now, this, I don't know why this isn't, you know what, let's highlight it. We'll pink it as well. I was looking for this one. So Banquo says, look how our partner's wrapped. This is a key quote to describe for us how into it Macbeth actually is. He's excited by what's going on, And this actually comes into the idea of predestination. Macbeth wasn't forced to do any of this. He was excited. And this is one of the quotes that you can um, put out there to show that even Banquo could physically see the excitement on his face. Okay. Now here, Macbeth, I don't know why it's not highlighted, but it's pretty important. If chance will have me king, why chance may crown me without my stir. So he thinks, look, so far he hasn't done anything, and the first prophecy has come true. So maybe he won't do anything to make the second prophecy come true. Maybe he'll just be king. And this one. Stars hide your fires, let not light see my black and deep desires. He's almost fearful here of his ambition and his black and deep desires, even just the metaphor that he's used to describe them, is quite interesting because it shows that he really is worried about what he's feeling already, and it's just a little bit after the witches. So it doesn't take him long. Again, there's a repetition in the letter that he sends to his wife that he burned and desired to question them further. So there's a repetition of the metaphor of burning to describe how he's feeling at this point. And she says, yet I do fear thy nature. It is too full of the milk of human kindness. She's worried because he's too nice. And she decides that she's going to have to sway him to do what she wants. So this is pretty much my favourite speech in Macbeth. One of my favourite speeches of all time. It's showing Lady Macbeth's psychosis, really, as far as I'm concerned. She's nuts, and this really comes alive in this speech. So she says, the raven himself is hoarse that croaks the fatal entrance of Duncan under my battlements. Come, you spirits that tend on mortal thoughts, unsex me here, and fill me from the crown to the toe, top full of direst cruelty. So she's talking about how King Duncan is going to die under her battlements. So she's using emotive language, she's using very warlike metaphors. She's basically declared war upon Duncan. He didn't do anything wrong, he happens to be king, and she wants Macbeth to be king. That's really it. So there's also, Macbeth talks about how Duncan is a really nice person, which makes this even more tragic that this is happening. So she's basically calling on the spirits. So she's calling on demons to take away her sex, to take away her femininity, so that she feels that her femininity is getting in her way of her ambition, and she wants to be filled with cruelty. She says, make thick my blood, stop the access and passage to remorse. She feels that she wants the blood in her body to be thick so that it can't bring about remorse through her body. It's come to my woman's breasts and take my milk for gall. It's very, very demented, really. She calls them murdering ministers. Wait on nature's mischief. Again, that repetition of the idea of going against nature. Her very desire to go against her nature and no longer be feminine is going against nature. And you might want to make a link between her and the witches, who both go against their feminine natures. The witches have beards. Lady Macbeth has very, anti-female, anti-feminine ideas. She asks the thick knight to come And my keen knife see not the wound it makes. She's scared that she's going to feel emotions. She's scared that she's going to feel bad for what's about to happen. She's personified the knife here. So the knife sees not the wound it makes. Her personification of the knife, if you're going to look at techniques, she's actually separating it from her so that when she stabs someone, it's not her that's killing, it's the knife. It's her way of dealing with the guilt or remorse that comes from hurting others. And it's really interesting that so early into the play, and she does this. This is one of the first times that we see her. This is pretty much, the first page that we see her. And she's basically asking the demons to come and take that away. Okay, so she basically says to him, make your hand and your tongue look like an innocent flower, but be a serpent. The juxtaposition of flowers and serpents, and the idea of innocence and deceit is there. Duncan, with a bit of irony, they invite him basically to their house. He says this castle has a pleasant seat. The air nimbly and sweetly recommends itself unto our gentle senses. That's a bit of nice irony from from Shakespeare, because Duncan doesn't realize what's about to happen to him, but the audience do, and that's what's really interesting here. That Shakespeare is giving the audience more information than what Duncan has. One of Macbeth's most famous lines, "If it were done when 'tis done, then 'twere well it were done quickly." He just wants to get it over and done with at this point. He doesn't want to think about it. He doesn't want to prolong it any more than it already is. He doesn't even want to do it. He's being forced by his wife. So he talks about even-handed justice, commends the ingredients of our poison chalice to our own lips. So he believes that karma will come and get him. He believes that it's going to come back and bite him, and he's really worried about it. There's a double trust, first as I am his kinsman and his subject, strong both against the deed, then as his host. So he believes that he's going to get it back at him because he is Duncan's cousin and he's his host. He's in his house. If that doesn't get justice, what will? And this is the part that, we do feel that Macbeth is scared because Duncan is a good person, so clear in his great office that his virtues will plead like angels, trumpet-tongued against that deep damnation of his taking off, and pity like a naked new-born baby, striding the blast of heaven's cherubim, horsed upon the sightless couriers of the air, shall blow the horrid deed in every eye, that tears shall drown the wind. So he's saying the great things that he's done are going to intercede for him. They're going to plead for him like angels. And if people are going to think that he's a baby, he's a newborn, innocent baby, that, when people see a baby, they're like, oh, he's so sweet and innocent. This is what they're going to say for Duncan. That's how good Duncan is. Horrid deed, the murder that's about to happen. It's going to make everyone cry to the point that the tears will drown the wind. That's a very, very strong metaphor there. But then he says, I have no spur to prick the sides of my intent, but only vaulting ambition, which overleaps itself and falls on the other. If you want a really good quote to describe Macbeth's ambition, there it is. Only vaulting ambition which overleaps itself. Again, the use of personification. And him and Lady Macbeth do this a lot. They use personification to separate themselves from the from whatever they're talking about. Here it's ambition, and the other one it was her killing. They don't want this. They're both very worried. They're both very scared. And these speeches really go to show that both Macbeth and Lady Macbeth
are scared and they're really uncomfortable with what they're about to do. Neither of them have gone in excited about it. The fact that they're using personification to separate themselves from what's happening goes to their mind and their psyche. I really like this one. She tells off Macbeth, and I just think she tells him off in such an amazing way. Was the hope drunk wherein you dressed yourself? Has it slept since? So, what is wrong with you, basically? She says, you're a coward, things that she really uses against Macbeth. She questions his masculinity. And this is the main way that she forces him to continue with this act. He says, Prithee, peace, I dare all that become a man who dares do more is none. There's no man out there who will do more than me. This is what he says to her. And again, there's that motif of masculinity and femininity. And later there is a conversation between Lady Macduff and her son where she talks about what is a man, what is masculinity. And here Macbeth basically says masculinity is killing and it's violence and all these things. But Lady Macduff tries to teach her son that that's the opposite of masculinity and that's not the man that she wants him to be. So again, Shakespeare is juxtaposing Macbeth and the Macduffs later on in what is masculinity. This is one of the most emotive, violent descriptions, I believe, in any play. Definitely in Macbeth. I think it's a very important quote if you want to understand Lady Macbeth. She says, I've given suck and know how tender it is to love the baby that milks me. So she's breastfed. This is actually a very interesting thing that's come up in one of the journal articles. What's happened to Macbeth's baby, because she's had a child. There's nothing about him later on. There's nothing attests. In fact, Macbeth actually says he has no children to inherit him. She says, I know how tender it is to love the baby that milks me. I would, while it was smiling in my face, have plucked my nipple from his boneless gums and dashed the brains out, had I sworn to do this. So she basically says, while she's breastfeeding, smiling into the baby's face, if she had made a promise that she would do it, she would dash out, she would pull out the baby while it was sucking on her breast and dash his brains out. It's such a violent, metaphor. And if that doesn't really describe Lady Macbeth, I don't know what does. And then, he shows his fear. He says, what if we should fail? And then she says, look, we fail. So he's scared. This again shows that she was the one that was pushing him. This is a really interesting line that Macbeth says to his wife: "Bring forth men children only, for thy undaunted. Oh my God, say that word, hey. Metal should compose nothing but males." So after she's basically given him that pep talk of how they should just, go in and kill him and not be scared, he says, "You should only have male children." And it's almost as if she's so masculine that she can't give birth to female children. Again, it's that theme of femininity and masculinity, and he believes she's strong, and strength is, an attribute of males. And this is, a really big compliment that he gives her here. Their candles are all out. There is a motif of candles and light that comes in here, and I just thought it was really interesting that Banquo says that here. Let's keep going. Oh, this is one of the best soliloquies. Macbeth talks. It's called "Is This a Dagger Which I See Before Me?" It's his first hallucination. He has several hallucinations throughout the play. This is the first one. In some plays, directors choose to have
a physical dagger in front of him, and others choose to have nothing in front of him. And I think that really goes back to the idea, is this in his head? Was he hallucinating? Or was it an apparition from the witches, which is another way of looking, other witches messing with his mind at this point. My personal theory is it's hallucination, because that way you can see that he hallucinates and Lady Macbeth later hallucinates as well. We know that Lady Macbeth, that was really nothing to do with the witches, that was all her, because we see her physically sleepwalking and reliving the murders. So I personally like to think that this is a hallucination. So I talk about it as if it's a hallucination, but there are many people out there that do believe that it may have been something that the witches did just to mess with his mind. So he says, "Is this a dagger which I see before me, the handle towards my hand?" So he talks about this dagger is in front of him and it's positioned in a way which makes him hold it, which is really interesting because Shakespeare doesn't give anything to chance here. He says it's it's basically enticing him. It's there for him to hold. And he says, "Come, let me clutch thee." So he takes the invitation. A dagger of the mind, a false creation proceeding from the heat oppressed brain. So, is it a fatal vision? Okay, so he's very confused as to what this is. But I mean, if you're looking at a psychological way of reading this, he's thinking about it, it's in his head. Um, he talks about the blood, and I mean, the motif of the dagger, obviously, it represents the violence. Nature seems dead, and wicked dreams abuse the curtain's sleep. Witchcraft celebrates pale Hecate's offerings and withered murder. Hecate actually comes later. She's the head of the witches, and we see her later, we meet her, but really what he's talking about that's important for us is the motif of sleep. You're about to see why sleep is important. So wicked dreams abuse the curtain's sleep. It is actually a foreshadowing. So if you're doing your TEE table, look at writing foreshadowing for the technique, and actually personification as well, because sleep is something that both Macbeth and Lady Macbeth lose. We'll talk about it soon. Oh, this is one of the most amazing lines. "I go and it is done, the bell invites me. Hear it not, Duncan, for it is a knell that summons thee to heaven or to hell." He doesn't know whether Duncan's going to go to heaven or hell, which is really interesting because remember before we've just read that he says Duncan is so like a newborn baby. He's so innocent. His good deeds are going to, plead for him. And now he's almost like he's trying to put in the question in his own mind so he feels less guilty about what he's about to do. So, things are getting real for him. This is his only way of dealing with it. He's going to pretend that he doesn't know whether Duncan is actually good or evil, whether he's actually deserving. This could be a good time to talk about regenticide. How do you pronounce that? Whatever. We're going to go with whatever. Killing the king, okay? So, back in those days, the king was thought to be chosen by God himself, and if you do anything against the king, you are basically undoing God's decision and you're going against God himself. It's blasphemy. It's a form of blasphemy. And that's why in Macbeth, killing King Duncan was such a shocking idea. Here, Lady Macbeth, I think this is really interesting. That which has made them drunk has made me bold. She's resorted to alcohol to be able to do this. She's actually tried to get herself drunk to become bold. What has quenched them has given me fire. So, she's feeling really excited about it, but it's not coming from within her. It's coming from the alcohol. So basically what they do is after they kill Duncan, they decide to kill his bodyguards so that they can frame them and say that they did it when they found out that
the bodyguards killed him, they decided to kill them as well. So this is, basically Macbeth and Lady Macbeth's way of getting away with it. But Macbeth here, okay, this shows his mentality here. He says one cried, "God bless us," and "Amen" the other. I could not say amen when they did say God bless us. And she says, consider it not so deeply. So don't even think about it. Okay, they said God bless us, someone said amen, and you didn't say amen. Like, get over it. And he says, but wherefore could not I pronounce amen? I had most need of blessing, and amen stuck in my throat. He wanted a blessing as he was about to kill 3 people. He's all over the place. His mind is all over the place. And if you want evidence of Macbeth's confusion as what's happening, in the middle of killing people, he's upset because he couldn't say amen. Now, this is really interesting because the motif of sleep comes in. Methought I heard a voice cry, sleep no more. Macbeth does murder sleep, the innocent sleep. He talks about sleep here. And she says, what do you mean? She's not even understanding him. And Macbeth says, sleep no more to all the house. Glamis hath murdered sleep, and therefore Cawdor shall sleep no more. Macbeth shall sleep no more. And what's really interesting is Lady Macbeth sleeps no more. And Macbeth does have problems sleeping, but Lady Macbeth, when she's sleeping, she's sleepwalking. So because he's killed all of these people in their sleep, he gets sort of cursed so that he himself never sleeps again. And she tells him, go drink some water, go wash your hands, just stop it, Then she realizes that the idiot has left with the dagger. He's left with the evidence that with him. So if anyone finds this, they're going to know that he was the one that killed them. So she says to him, go back, give the dagger back. And he says, I'm not going back in there. There's too much blood. You don't understand how badly this place looked. I'll put the daggers back. And this is when she goes back, and that's what sets off her insanity. This is a really interesting metaphor because Shakespeare, again, it's a motif. He says, will all great Neptune's ocean wash this blood clean from my hands? No, this my hand will rather the multitudinous seas in Inca. Whoa, yeah, that word. Making the green one red. So he says, you know what, Neptune, I think he's the god of water in Greek mythology or Roman mythology. Don't quote me, but whatever. He's a god in mythology. And all of the oceans in the world couldn't wash the blood from his hands. In fact, the blood on his hands will make the water red. That's how much blood he has on his hands. It's obviously really affected him. And Lady Macbeth says, my hands are of your colour, but I shame to wear a heart so white. There's that metaphor of colour. Her hands are also red from blood, but she'd rather them be red than her heart white. There's a bit of irony here. Macduff doesn't want to tell Lady Macbeth what happened because he says, O gentle lady, 'tis not for you to hear what I can speak. The repetition in a woman's ear would murder as it fell. Murder is so horrendous that he couldn't say it in front of a lady. Little does he know it's actually Lady Macbeth who's been the reason for all this happening. So there's a bit of irony there that Shakespeare uses to show the audience more about masculinity, femininity, against the laws of nature, all those things that we talked about before. Again, more light and darkness. If you want to talk about light and darkness as a theme and as a motif. So Malcolm and Donalbain are the king's 2 sons. That's just if you wanted a bit of character reference here. Upon my head they placed a fruitless crown and put a barren sceptre in my gripe, no son of mine succeeding. So here we learn that Macbeth is actually very bitter about not having children to inherit even if he becomes king, he's barren. Okay, he doesn't have children. And it's interesting because earlier, the witches meet him on a heath, which is barren land. So again, there's that repetition of the barrenness of Macbeth. We are men. So again, that masculinity, the idea of masculinity in Macbeth. Okay, we're just going to skip because we're not going to go through the whole play, otherwise we'll be here until we're 90 years old talking about Macbeth. Which I'd enjoy personally, but I don't think you would. Okay, so again, talking about the idea of sleep and the motif of sleep. We will eat our meal in fear and sleep in the affliction of these terrible dreams that shake us nightly. So every night they have bad dreams, and he's decided better be with the dead, whom we, to gain our peace, have sent to peace. He's trying to make himself feel better that he's sent the dead people to their peace. He's actually done Duncan a favour, as opposed to himself, who lives on in torture. And he says, then onto the torture of the mind to lie in restless ecstasy. His mind is in constant torture. He says Duncan is in his grave. Where's my cursor? Okay. Duncan is in his grave. After life's fitful fever, he sleeps well. He's actually jealous of Duncan at this point because Duncan is sleeping and he is not. Again, that repetition. Are you a man? Okay, that's Lady Macbeth. Okay, so basically, Banquo here, after they killed him, his ghost appears at a party that they're having, and Macbeth loses his mind because, a ghost just appeared of a person whom he's just murdered. And he says, "Thou canst not say I did it, never shake thy gory locks at me." So basically, Banquo is sitting there shaking his head at Macbeth, and Macbeth is saying, "You can't say I did it." He's scared that he's going to get caught again. Lady Macbeth tries her usual, "Are you a man?" Trying to bully him into doing what she wants, but at this point he doesn't want to hear it. And he says, "I am a bold one too, that dare on that which might appall the devil. That dare look on that which might appall the devil." I'm not just a man. I'm bold, and I could look on the devil. Look on what the devil would feel bad about. Basically, the ghost of Banquo is what he's referring to here. Macbeth, I love this line. "I am in blood, stepped in so far that should I wade no more." He's drowning in blood. They've killed so many people. They've killed, the king, his bodyguards, his best friend. He feels like he can't even swim in the blood anymore. It's just such amazing metaphor, such strong metaphor there. Symbolize Macbeth's sadness and his feeling of drowning. Basically, he's drowning in the blood that they've caused. Such powerful imagery. I love it. Oh, double double, is a very famous thing. We're going to skip it because I really like this line, and I think it's probably often neglected. The second, which says, "By the pricking of my thumbs, something wicked this way comes," and Macbeth enters. Is Macbeth actually wicked? This is a question, that I'm going to put out there. Is Macbeth actually evil? Because that's really interesting. So basically, Macbeth sees all these apparitions. He goes to the witches to talk to them. He wants to ask them questions. They promise him that no man born of a woman will beat him. And it's this promise that gives him, the arrogance that he sort of has from here until the end of the play. Lady Macduff talks to her son, little Macduff. The son says, "What is a traitor?" And Lady Macduff says, "Why, one that swears and lies." And she talks about, traitors must be hanged, killed. And the son says, "Who must hang them?" And Lady Macduff says, "Honest men." Who are they talking about here? who was the traitor that must be punished for what he's done? It's our good friend Macbeth who should be hung for his actions of being a traitor. And it's interesting here because Lady Macduff says that honest men, the real masculinity are people who get justice, people who correct the wrongs that have happened. And it's interesting because this is a indirect juxtaposition to what we have seen masculinity to be up till now. Up to now, the Macbeth's view of masculinity is it's someone who's really powerful. It's someone who uses power to be ambitious, to kill people if need be. But here, Lady Macduff is saying no. Brave men, real men, are ones who get justice and correct what has been wrong. We can use. Oh, I love this bit. This is the bit where Lady Macbeth starts sleepwalking. She's been sleepwalking for a while, but at this point, her maid or her, her nurse, whatever you want to call her, calls for a doctor, and this doctor comes in to watch her. And they hear that, right? They hear what she's saying because she's sleepwalking and sleep talking. This is the best. Are you ready? You're not ready. You cannot be ready. Are you ready for this jelly? All right, let's go. Lady Macbeth says, yet here's a spot. Out damned spot. Out, I say. 1, 2. Hell is murky. Okay, she's talking about the spot that's in her hands is the blood, and she's trying to take the blood out. And she says, this is the conversation that she's had with Macbeth. Fire, my lord, fire, a soldier and a feared. So you're a soldier and you're supposed, why are you scared? What need we fear, who knows it, when none can call our power to account? No one is going to tell us, how can you do this? Because we are the most powerful. You can't hold people accountable who are really powerful. So she says to him, don't worry. So she's reliving this conversation that she's having with Macbeth. And she says, yet who would have thought the old man to have had so much blood in him? She's talking about the king. She's like, man, who would have thought he had so much blood in him? The blood is really getting to her, and that's what's causing her insanity. What will these hands never be clean? And then she goes, it's funny because in this, she's actually going line to line. She says, what will these hands never be clean? No more of it, my lord, no more of that. So she's talking to him, then she's talking to herself, and she goes, I love this. If you put this next line next to the Neptune line, you'll have a really beautiful essay. She says, here's the smell of blood still, all the perfumes of Arabia will not sweeten this little hand. So, Shakespeare here is juxtaposing, all the perfumes of Arabia and this little hand, and yet all the perfumes of Arabia still can't make her hand sweet and take away the stench, take away the smell of blood that she could smell on her hands. What an interesting imagery and metaphor there, and it's very similar to Macbeth's earlier one about all of Neptune's oceans couldn't wash these hands. So if you're going to do an analysis, these metaphors and this imagery goes to show that their hands will forever be tainted by this blood, by this innocent blood that they have on it. The doctor, again, unnatural deeds do breed unnatural troubles. Infected minds to their deaf pillows will discharge their secrets. So he says, look, it's because they've done something unnatural that it's stuffed up their mind. And really, this is where he's saying, It's infected their minds. They're sick because of what's happened. So let's keep going. Macbeth, I've almost forgot the taste of fears. This arrogance that he's got, all his fears have left since the witches have said to him, no man born of a woman will beat him. I've supped full with horrors, dying as familiar to my slaughterhouse thoughts cannot once start me. Again, that really, violent language, slaughterhouse, horrors, this emotive language really goes to show what he's feeling. Oh, this is one of the best. I always refer to this as tomorrow, tomorrow, and tomorrow, even though it's halfway through. A lot of people do talk about this speech as being called tomorrow, tomorrow, but it's actually like here that he says it. So here they come to Macbeth and they tell him, look, Lady Macbeth has died. And he responds with this: she should have died after. There would have been a time for such a word. So he says she should die tomorrow. And of course, the idea is tomorrow never comes. So he didn't want her to die. This really affects him. And he says tomorrow and tomorrow and tomorrow. Creeps in this petty pace from day to day to the last syllabus of recorded time. So this is the part that's really important. All our yesterdays have lighted fools the way to dusty death. Out, out, brief candle. So he describes life as a brief candle. It's something that's lit for a while and then it's just out. And he says, life's but a walking shadow, a poor player that struts and frets his hour upon the stage. So a bad actor, basically, coming around, doing his, and then he's heard no more. So it's a bit of a stage show, and then it's over and no one remembers it. It's a tale told by an idiot, full of sound and fury, signifying nothing. So we think that the world is important, that life is important, but really it's a story told by an idiot that looks really exciting. There's a lot of sound and there's a lot of passion, but there's no meaning to it. So he's really, he loves Lady Macbeth. He's very upset that she's dead. And his way of coping is looking at life as if it's nothing. So at this point, I up basically Macbeth gets beaten and he kills himself. Um, these quotes are meant to give you an understanding of what's happening, trying to make links between parts of the story. These quotes were chosen because they can show more than one thing. Sometimes they'll tell you not just about the plot, but about characters. They'll give you insights on into some of the minds of some of the characters,